thank you very much. And yes, I'd like to acknowledge that I am sitting here on the unceded land of the Mi'kmaq, very gratefully and very thankfully to them. Can you hear me okay, everybody? I'm okay. Okay, I'd like to ask a question of Madame Formsma regarding friendship centers and what you are noticing with regards to the violence against women, domestic violence. We're told that numbers show statistically across the country that in times like this of this shutdown, violence and domestic violence has risen in many parts of the country up to even 30%, which is why our government has put money into shelters and transition houses. 207.5 million to support many organizations, 40 million to the women and gender equality centers, 26 million to women's shelters, et cetera, et cetera. What, if anything, is this helping in your communities, in Indigenous communities across the country? And is the friendship centers across the country able to access any of that funding? And if so, how do you use it? And if not, what do you need?
Thank you. Maybe I could just speak to what we're hearing nationally, and then I don't know if members from Task or Edith from Val-d'Or have any comments about what they're experiencing locally, but we have heard that the increases in calls to friendship centers to support with violence in the home, what's happening is because of the isolation measures that where we put or where we can remove or move people is very limited. So shelters that friendship centers are running or partner with, again, I'll go back to the availability doesn't always mean accessibility. So just because the funding has been available and theoretically friendship centers should have been able to access some of that, I can't say that it's been a widespread accessible to friendship centers. So a lot of the First Nations funding for shelters went on reserve, which very rightfully so. And then the funding for women's shelters in just generally also went to like a lot of the mainstream or women's shelters within the urban spaces. So we kind of end up in that jurisdictional gap again where, if there's something available off reserve because we're seen as Indigenous nonprofits, that they think that the federal government has given us money for something or that it's the federal government's responsibility. And then the federal government is saying, well, this money is available to all organizations. You should be able to access it through those means. You don't need a specific amount for urban Indigenous. So yes, we definitely have heard the increase and the ability for friendship centers to access the funding has really been quite piecemeal across the country. Certainly nationally, we haven't been able to get anything cohesive through our office. Not to say that we should, but that's been our experience. So I don't know if Edith or Task might have a more localized experience.
Does anybody want to respond?
Task,
Hi.
speaking.
Thank
Hi.
you.
At the local level here in Toronto, we've mobilized very quickly across member agencies, in particular Native Women's Resource Center, Thunder Women Healing Lodge Society, and ALS, Aboriginal Legal Services, and Council Fire have worked collaboratively to try to address getting a crisis line together and trying to put funding proposals into the province in particular, trying to work with the city on getting hoteling. We've been actively moving, but we do need governments to move with us at all levels, because right now some of these agencies are in fact out of pocket for the expenditures of trying to hotel people to make sure that they have a safe place to land. So while we're all sorting out, as my colleague Jocelyn said, our jurisdictional issues, I think what we're finding is that the work doesn't stop, the need doesn't stop. If a woman needs to leave her home with her children, it needs to happen now, whether agencies have money to support that or not. Those are transportation costs, food costs, laundry costs, the relocation costs and hoteling, and then where is the permanent housing to place them when this is over?
First of all, I want to say thank you so much, Walalan, to all of the gentlemen who have presented. Very, very interesting and really important stuff that we're talking about today. I have to say that it's wonderful to see Nunavut COVID-free, and to see your community there celebrating on television for that incredible milestone. Wonderful and so uplifting, and it would be nice if we could all learn from what they've done. Here in Nova Scotia, we do have a number of cases. So far, we're pretty good in Millbrook First Nation, which is within my community. And but I'm always concerned because during the last epidemic that we had, which was the H1N1, I was actually in government at the time here in Nova Scotia, and we were telling folks that in order to be inoculated, there was an inoculation that it was pregnant women and First Nations people needed to be inoculated first, because they were the most easy to get that particular virus. And I was shocked at the racism that brought up, where people were complaining that our First Nations people would be able to get in line to be inoculated first. And I'm aware of racism, of course, but that really blew me away, and I was so disgusted. So I think that, as Chief Bellegarde mentioned, there are so many things that we need to look at on a larger scale, and the COVID-19 just brings out certain things and puts a spotlight on certain things that are already happening. One of the things I'm interested in asking you about is the personal protective equipment. So on May the 1st, the Minister of Indigenous Services told the committee that 59.8 million had been used so far to purchase personal protective equipment and to support emergency preparedness for the communities, and noted that the funding is in addition to the 80 million for health emergency preparedness announced in the budget 2019. But prior to the pandemic, did the department consult Indigenous communities and organizations about the types of and quantities of protective equipment and essential supplies that might be needed in the stockpile that the department has? And also, I'm just curious again, how, on average, how long does it take for remote and isolated communities to receive the orders that they need of personal protective equipment from the department? I'm not sure, maybe which one of you would like to respond?
Let me start. Thanks for it. I'll jump in. Nobody's asking us questions. So, but from our perspective, let me put it this way: from year to eternity, probably, because we never got nothing. We didn't get one mask. We didn't get one hand sanitizer. Nor did we get anything in our communities, in the Métis communities. And as I said, there's 400,000 of us in Western Canada, and we play a very important role in the economy of this country, or we pay billions in taxes as people. So I'm not even being treated as a Canadian because of this jurisdictional limbo, who's responsible for us. So when these stockpiles are taking place in Canada, I'm sad to say as a leader that it's not inclusive of us, and we have nothing. We don't get one mask. We don't get one Band-Aid, let's put it that way. And I'm not making this up. This is real. This is sincere. As I said last week, you heard from the committee when the representative of First Nation, Finib, when she said that Métis are not our jurisdiction. That's provincial jurisdiction. And when you go to provinces, they say, nope, you got to go back to Canada. So we're in a dark zone, and we're not even treated as Canadians. So we get zero. And thank you for that question, Lenora.
Thank you. And maybe Mr. Bellegarde, Chief Bellegarde?
Well, thank you, Lenore, for that. And Gain, and it varies across Canada. Like I said, there's 634 First Nations. And in your territory, there's 13 in Nova Scotia, and they're all Mi'kmaq.
Yeah.
You also have 2 in PEI and 2 in Newfoundland, and it varies in terms of getting out supplies to the First Nations community. I also mentioned earlier on that we have 96 fly-in communities in the north. So that's a different situation and more challenges in the north. But even on the ground, so Indigenous Services Canada, they do have a responsibility through treaty, through Section 35, to provide this. Again, in exchange for all the land we're sharing, certain rights and responsibilities and obligations were to be provided to First Nations people. And
Chief,
it's slow coming out. And the PPE, there's a need for more, for it to be accessible. There's no question. And again, keep pushing for our full involvement, the inclusion in policy, design, and legislation and programs going forward.